from the heart of rural France. This is the Keto Woman podcast, brought to you by me. Hello Keto lovelies, I'm Daisy Brackenhall, and I've spent most of my life struggling with my weight and confidence, and have always had a difficult relationship with food. Even when I finally got to my target weight, after weight loss surgery and eating low carb, I couldn't maintain it and I was miserable. I've been keto now for over 2 years, and it has given me the freedom to fall in love with food again, without the constant gain, loss, guilt, virtue cycle of before. Health and happiness is where it's at now, running on fat. Welcome to the Keto Woman podcast. Each week I'll be chatting to inspirational women, maybe even the odd man, to discover the secrets to their success so that I can share them with you. So what is keto? Keto is a way of eating that enables you to switch your body's main fuel source from sugar to fat. Who doesn't want to be a fat burner, right? But how do we achieve this? A great place to start is by keeping carbs under 20 grams a day. So things like leafy greens and above ground vegetables, plus some nuts and seeds and the incidental carbs you find in things like full fat dairy. Choose delicious fatty proteins and be free and easy with oily dressings on salad and butter on your veggies. Once you're in the swing of things, you can tweak it to suit you. Make your own personalized keto. You'll hear all sorts of ways to keto from my guests. There is no one way to do keto, no one size fits all. I hope to show you just how flexible and fabulous this way of eating can be. I'm not a doctor, and most of my guests won't be either, so we really can't give you medical advice. It's always best to consult your own doctor when making big changes to your diet and lifestyle, because they know you and your medical history, and so have access to the bigger picture. Wouldn't it be helpful to have one place where you could find all the links? Want to sign up to my new Patreon exclusive Facebook group, Daisy's Lovelies? No problem. How about subscribing to my YouTube channel? Please help me notch up my first 1,000 subscribers by going to links.ketowomanpodcast.com and following the YouTube link. Not following me on Instagram yet? Hit the Instagram button. You get the idea. All the buttons, all the links you need are at links.ketowomanpodcast.com. Thank you, Crystal Friesel, for supporting me and this podcast by making a pledge at my Patreon page. Do you want to hear your name here at the top of the show? Are you enjoying this podcast and would like to help me make more episodes? Then head over to my Patreon page at patreon.com/KetoWoman or hit the support button on the Keto Woman podcast website. You can also find the link in the description wherever you listen to the podcast. It means a great deal to me, and you will get to headline the show just like Crystal did today. Welcome to episode number 154, where I am joined by extraordinary woman Kate Notto. Kate is a special educationer who has been practicing her craft for more than 30 years and has worked with students from birth through adulthood. She has specialised in the areas of autism, elementary math and elementary reading. Recently, Kate has returned to a favourite area in education and is working with preschool-aged students. Kate grew up in the beautiful Finger Lakes region of upstate New York. She lived in the Chicagoland area of Illinois for almost 20 years. Then, after suddenly finding herself single again, she decided to follow a dream and transplanted herself to the mountains of Tennessee. Kate is here to share her story of discovering keto and the path of ongoing self-discovery it has led her on. It has just dawned on me that I'm heading into my 3rd year of podcasting. Can you believe it? So many extraordinary women and a fair few extraordinary men too. A big thank you to all my extraordinary guests, without whom there would be no podcast. But most of all, a big thank you to you for listening and supporting me over the years by allowing me to tickle your earbuds. It is a great honour and a great pleasure to me to know that I spend time with you wherever you are every week. I think it only fitting to dedicate the 3-year mark to all the wonderful teachers out there who have a hell of a job at the best of times. I think we can all remember those special teachers from our childhood who inspired us to be better people. I certainly can. So thank you for all you do and courage, as the French say, in this extra stressful time. Stay safe, stay wonderful, and take good care of you. Welcome, Kate, to the Keto Women podcast. How are you doing today?
Thanks, Daisy. I'm doing great today. How are you?
I'm good. I'm not going to say why. I'm going to do that horrible vague booking thing that people do because I can't talk about it yet. But I'm very excited about something. I will reveal what it is at a later date. I so hate it when people do that. So I apologize.
And I promise not to tell a soul.
Good news, hopefully. I can tell you that much. Well, we chat a lot online and we meet up on Saturdays. So I know a fair bit about you, but the people at home don't. So perhaps you could tell us about you.
Okay, sure. I think I'll go way back to childhood even. So as a little kid, I was skinny, scrawny, tiny little thing, smallest child born of 3. But as my father puts it, somewhere around age 7, I discovered there was more to life than peanut butter and crackers. And from that point forward, my weight has been a struggle my entire life. I was never able to get a real handle on it. It would go up and down. There were certain things I would try. I remember even in my early teens trying high protein diets and living on cottage cheese and hot dogs at the time and diet Faygo soda, which was a thing. But I was never able to really just get it squared away and not have to worry about my weight. It was just always something I had a battle with. I did try Weight Watchers in my 20s, in my 30s, in my 40s, and sometimes more successfully than others. At one point in my early 40s or right around 40, I tried Weight Watchers again, and I also was working with a therapist at the time, and she had suggested that I look into possibly giving up sugar because she felt that it really was something I was using as more of a coping tool than an actual food satisfaction tool. And so I began doing some research, and I ran across a book called Potatoes, Not Prozac. And the woman that wrote the book, and I don't recall her name, she advocated absolutely no sugar products at all and no artificial sweeteners at all. She also advocated no white products, so no white flour, no white rice, things like that. And between doing Weight Watchers and following her ideas around the no sugar and no white products, I found that I probably at that point was doing what we would consider a low carb diet. I still had a little bit of fruit. I was religious with my banana every morning with my latte, but not a ton of fruit on top of that. I would do Triscuit crackers, which are just a wheat, salt, and water waffle weave cracker here in the United States with cheese for lunchtime. So I'd have a little bit of that, and occasionally whole wheat pasta or brown rice with dinner, but not a ton and not every single day. So I probably was low carb and didn't even realize it at the time. Between that and the combination of Weight Watchers, I dropped about 130 pounds and got down to the lowest weight that I ever had recalled being at in my adult lifetime. And that was around the time I was 40. I maintained that for about 2 years.
Doing the same thing.
Doing the same thing. Way. Yeah, it took about 2 years to really drop all of that weight. And then I ended up moving and moving in with someone that I was in a relationship with. And unfortunately, it was far away from where I had been. It was over an hour from where I had been. So I no longer was attending that Weight Watchers meeting and didn't have that connection with the leader, which for me had been essential at the time. And so I kind of drifted away from the Weight Watchers. And then after about another year, kind of started drifting away from the no sugar and letting little bits in. And as you know, it's kind of that big cascade. Yeah. Once you let the little bit in, the rest seems to follow. And before I knew it, I had put back on, over the next several years, probably about 100 of the 130 that I had taken off, which just broke my heart.
But it's so easy to put it on, isn't it? I've always astounded myself with how much I can put on how fast.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. It like just floors me how fast it can come back on. And I was also at that point then in a very stressful situation, both personally and at school and my work. And so I let it creep up, but physically I felt horrible. I was having a lot of joint issues, a lot of pain issues. They were thinking that possibly I had fibromyalgia, although I didn't hit all of the markers for it because they really couldn't account for the pain issues and the muscle spasm issues I was having trouble with. And I managed to get myself back into Weight Watchers at that point. I didn't manage to go no sugar, but I did manage to get back into Weight Watchers, and then again dropped about that 100 pounds over about 2 years' time and was feeling really good again. But then again, you get into a new relationship, you start eating new things, you don't watch what you're eating as much, and before you know it, it kind of escalates again. Luckily, I did not put on as much as I had the time before. So it's like each time I've regained, I've done the better where I don't gain and then some. I just don't quite gain as much. But regained probably 70 pounds again, all in all, by the time it was done. And around that time, which was probably about 3 years ago, a friend of mine who I had known for several years, but who I didn't see very often because she worked in Chicago and I at the time was living out in the suburbs. But I started noticing was dropping weight rapidly and was looking fantastic. And when I started picking her brain about what she was doing, she told me she had read Dr. Fung's book, The Obesity Code. And she started talking to me about that and what a shift that had made for her at that time in her thinking. So I got the book, of course, and I read the book. And what I realized was, even though I had been trying to do Weight Watchers, and Weight Watchers, I mean, everybody villainizes Weight Watchers for what they do. And in some regards, I do get it. But I do know that over the years, they have also shifted a lot of their thinking. And it does come more away from the old thinking into a newer thinking. So they do put more weight onto healthier food choices. Now, they're heavy on their fruits. Fruit choices is not necessarily what we would consider good choices. But they were getting away from that, where you could eat all the fiber you wanted to knock down the amount of points that something cost. And they were really starting to heavy weight processed junk food and processed sugared things like cakes and cookies and candies and things like that. So I felt like they were moving in the right direction. And when I read Dr. Fung's book, it's like, okay, they're moving, but they're not there yet. And they're not where it needs to be. And when I read Dr. Fung's book, it just resonated with every fiber in my being. I can't even begin to explain like how much I really felt like that was the truth, and the truth in nutrition, and the truth in dieting, and the truth in how our bodies function. And so I started to try doing at least a low carb at that point, and began doing tons and tons of research online, which is how I ended up finding the Two Keto Dudes podcast, which was tremendously helpful and again gave me lots of other resources to look at going into at that point in time. And I had quite a long commute at the time, and so I would listen to the podcast as I was coming back and forth from school. So I went through like a couple of years worth of podcasts in a very short time frame. So my brain was really full of information.
It's perfect, isn't it? Car journeys are perfect for listening to podcasts. It really passes the time quickly.
It does. It's amazing. I love it. Even now, even my commute is much shorter, but even now I love listening to the podcast just because it does. It kind of takes you out of that traffic thing, and makes it so much better. So I got into reading their stuff. And at some point I stumbled across your podcast when you first started it. And dirty little secret, you don't have to put this in there if you don't want to. But the very first podcast I ever listened to of yours, I was so used to the very like high energy of the Two Keto Dudes podcast that I thought to myself, oh my goodness, it's going to put me to sleep because she has such a mellow voice. So I had to do a little shifting to understand there are different kinds of podcasts.
A friend of mine, actually, she was talking about Monday mindset, and she was saying her partner said that Terry and I sound like late night DJs with that sort of soothing voices. Exactly. Little bit soporific maybe.
But I've come to love that about your podcast, honestly, especially in today's world. So yeah, I just kept delving deeper and deeper and trying to do it. And at first I was very successful and I did really well for a while. But then some significant life stressors again popped into my life, and I found myself not being able to stick with it and always going back to the sugar. And so the past 2 years probably have been for me a very deep personal journey into myself, into why is it that sugar calls my name so strongly? Why is it that siren that I can't seem to resist? And that's led me into doing more research and reading and work around sugar addiction and how to deal with sugar addiction, and looking also at binge eating and some disordered eating of sorts, because I definitely have tendencies towards binge eating when it comes to the sugar, not so much with other foods, but when it comes to the sugar. And I've done some coaching sessions with different people just to try to get to more of the bottom of it. And I'm kind of at that point where I certainly haven't lost all the weight that I want to lose. And I'll admit that right up. And I certainly am not one of those people who comes on and says, I have this tremendous story about how it was such a wondrous thing and it fixed me, bam, and I'm all better now. Because I don't. For me, it is a continual and daily struggle to keep myself on that keto bandwagon and to keep myself in that clean eating. The personal journey inward leads me to a lot of, I'm a very good caretaker for other people, and I do that great for everyone else and not so well for myself. And so learning those strategies and how to put my own personal care in the forefront, even when life gets busy and life gets hectic and life gets stressful, which is when it's the hardest for me to remember to do that. So I've been, especially this year, trying to pull those pieces together. And I look at keto as my home base now, rather than just that thing that's out there and every once in a while I pull it down. So it is my home base. And although there are those times where I definitely wander a little bit to a lot of it off of it, I always try to bring myself back to that home base as often and as much as I can. And that's when I feel better. That's when I drop a little more weight. That's, when I feel like I get things in control. My thinking is better. My body feels better, although I've never gotten to that point where I totally get rid of all of the aches and pains. But it's helped me to figure out so many things about myself. Like, one of the things that was startling to me was when they were trying to figure out if I had fibromyalgia. One of the issues I was having is I would have these muscle cramp spasms that were unbelievable. And it was like Charlie horses, but they weren't necessarily in my legs in the middle of the night, but I would go to do something and get one in my side or in my stomach and, have the worst time getting it to loosen up and let go. And that they attributed to some portion of fibromyalgia. But when I started delving into more of the nutrition with keto, I actually discovered that although my labs can look absolutely fine, my electrolyte needs are way higher than the average person. So my need for salt is way up there. If I don't get at least those 2 teaspoons on top of whatever I'm putting on my food during the day, I will then start getting the cramps again. And if I'm fasting, it's got to be even more than that. Figuring out the magnesium piece has been tricky for me because my body is very delicate in terms of if I don't use a specific amount of magnesium, the glycinate, and don't go above a certain amount, I am automatically running for the bathroom like crazy because it will go right through me. So figuring some of those things out has helped tremendously. Like I said, I try to keep keto as my home base now and go back to that as much as I possibly can. And I'm a work in progress. And I love that phrase that the fasting method used, that it's progress, not perfection, because certainly there's no perfect about how I've gone through this journey, and I continue to go through this journey. But it is progress, and you take the little bits of progress where you can get them and when you can get them. And I think having so many resources available to us right now, I think back to when I first gave up sugar 15 years ago, and there was nothing, a couple of books and that was it. Whereas now with all of the podcasts and the books and the movies and just so many different things and different Facebook groups, that people can join, That is such a tremendous support because I don't have a lot of people in my real-time life.
Same.
Let's call it, that are on board completely with this and do understand it. But I get all of that support then from these groups and my online friends and the people that I've met through those groups.
Yeah, same here. I mean, I don't really have anyone I talk about keto to, like you say, in real life. But for me, real life is online. I mean, especially I think real life has become online for a lot of people this year.
Yes.
But, that was me. That's where I've tapped into communities, to my tribe online. Like you say, it's a fantastic resource. There's so much out there.
Yes.
It's just incredible.
And I find it continually grows, which is the other really cool part, because as much as I thought maybe 6 months that I knew so much that there was to know, as I meet even more people and new people come into groups and new people speak up, it's like a continual growth thing because there's always new information coming out or new perspectives on something that you don't necessarily think about. And so it's ever growing and ever changing.
That's right. And what you say about it's progress, not perfection, and we're all on a journey, and we're all a work in progress. But I think that's how it should be.
Right.
Because you never sort of finish, you never get it all right, all perfect, because there's always going to be something that's going to change. There's going to be a new stressor that comes up, or it could just be that you're getting older and needs change and the diet works differently because you've gone through menopause or whatever it is. Everything changes. So you're always going to need to be a work in progress. And I think it's great just to assume that's what you are and that's what you're going to stay.
Yeah. And I think it's hard for people who get into the community and don't necessarily find those places where people are real about that. Because there are a lot of places where you will go within the keto community where all you see are these transformation pictures and these people who did great things and lost over 100 pounds. And that's all you hear is these huge positive things, which for someone like me who struggles and who it's a constant battle with can get very discouraging. I mean, and my other friend who I told you about earlier, Maria, when she did it, she thrived on those stories. Those were what spoke to her. And so for her, that was fantastic. For me, after a while, it got very discouraging because it's like, how come they can do it and I can't? So it was, finding that right space within the community. And I think that's one of the things I've always appreciated about KKB is the women in there are just very real and very honest about where they are in their journeys. And, we're all in different places, which is nice to see.
And that it is difficult. Like Amy Berger says, keto's simple, but it's certainly not always easy.
Right. Yeah. The premise is very simple. The premise is very clear cut for the most part and clean. But the process can be very mucky.
Absolutely.
Very, very mucky. Yeah.
And going way back to when things started changing for you, you said when you were about 7 years old. With hindsight, what was it about that time when you started gaining weight? I mean, you mentioned that it was just that you were eating more variety of food, but
there were some abuse issues in my childhood, which was, I think, one of the reasons when I was doing therapy and the therapist had recommended cutting out the sugar, that I was, able to do that and identify that. I think if I could go back and begin therapy at a much younger age, I wish I could have and had done that, but I lived in denial for years and years and years and years about what had happened. And so that just, I think when I started eating when I was 7, and from that age forward, a lot of it was just that layer of insulation. I needed that protection, something to make me unappealing to other people and to keep other people away from me. But there's a part of me that doesn't think I have that need at this point in my life, but I think at some point, metabolically, that shift happened where the eating no longer became a protection mechanism, but it truly did become more of an addiction issue. And addiction runs rampant in my family. We have drug addiction and alcohol addiction that goes back for generations. And I've always considered myself lucky because I've never had any of those tendencies. And goodness knows I'm a girl who loves her bourbon, but drinking has never been an addiction issue for me. But certainly I think sugar is. And yet it's interesting because as much as I've done, especially over the past year, more of that research and learning around sugar addiction and how that impacts and the things you have to do to cope with that, I, for a little while, also struggled with, so I'm an addict and I just can't control it. So when it happens, it's just going to happen. So I've had to shift my mindset a little bit too about I do have a sugar addiction, but it's not an addiction that's going to rule my life. And just because I have and I acknowledge that addiction doesn't mean I have to live in the shoes of being an active addict. And so that's been hard. I've been working really hard this past year on learning some other coping mechanisms of dealing with daily stress. And goodness knows this past year has presented us with a number of new fun, stressful situations. And as much as I love my alone time, being closed up in my apartment all by myself with no contacts and no, family close by to be able to go visit even, was a little bit more alone time than even I could cope with. So learning how to manage those, what creates anxiety within myself and identifying that anxiety. And because it's funny, and I haven't figured this piece out yet, but you can be in the midst of being really good to yourself and taking really good care of yourself. And for me, those things look like having a meditation practice where I sit and do the meditation at least several times a week, having some kind of spiritual journey component to my life and participating in that in whatever way it looks like at the time for me, because it shifts for me. Not doing too much social media time, putting limits on that, not doing too much veg in front of the TV time and putting some limits on that, and getting out into nature. I can be really good in all of those things and feeling fantastic, and the stress will hit. And for me, it's never one of those things that I just will automatically continue those things because I know they will make me feel better. I have to consciously make myself go into those things and do those things, physically make myself get up off the couch and stop watching TV or scrolling through Facebook and go do one of the things that I know that is better self-care for me. It's like, as much as they can be ingrained habits in a way, when stress hits, for some reason, those ingrained habits aren't as ingrained as I would like them to be or think they should be. And I haven't quite figured out what I have to do to get them to that point where they are. And it could just be a time frame thing that I have to do it as long as possible because I am dealing with so many years of neural pathways doing it the other way that it just takes that much longer to ingrain the new habit that it stays in place even in the face of those adversities.
Yes, I think it's very hard, like you say, when you get hit by that stress. And it's quite disheartening in some ways how easy it is to just want to switch back to those old habits. Because I'm the same. And you talk about having to make yourself do the things that you know will work.
Right.
But of course, in the heat of the moment, when you feel that way, you don't feel like making yourself do the things that, So in theory, you know exactly what to do to help yourself. But in practice, it's not always so easy.
Right. Yeah.
I don't know what the answer is either.
Yeah. And I've discovered that so this summer I got really good. I had time to myself. My stress was down. I was off from school for a while, so I could put that kind of out of my head. And so I felt like I was doing really well with that. And then I started back to school again. And bam, all of the things I was doing, I kind of let slip by the wayside. I didn't want to get up at 5 o'clock in the morning to have time to meditate before I went to school. And so for a few weeks, those things did slip. And I really felt myself fall into that hole again. And it included falling off of keto and binge eating carbs again because I was stressed and, not doing all of those things that I know that are better for me. But I'm very fortunate. I have a very dear friend who I talk to pretty much on a weekly basis. And we're wonderful sounding boards for each other. And spiritually and all I can say is on a soul level, we are so connected in terms of our beliefs and our thoughts and, what drives us. And talking with her and through things with her helped me realize what a detriment I was creating in addition to the stress I was already under. And so slowly putting things back into place and allowing myself some of that grace where Okay, so in the summer, maybe it was, and every single day I was getting up and meditating. But now that I'm in school, let's look at how I can shift it to fit into my schedule in a way that's workable. So I do it on the weekends, definitely. Saturday, Sunday, absolutely. I'm sitting there doing the meditation. During the week, I'm not making myself get up at 5 a.m. because I know that's just going to make me miserable. But okay, let's shift it. Let's say we do it at 7 o'clock at night after you've had that chance to wind down from work and you're feeling a little more not quite so out in the rafters busy, and all those little things you have to do when you get home you've taken care of. So then take that time rather than sitting in front of the TV. Go sit on the cushion and do the meditation and give yourself that moment. And even if you do that once or twice a week during the week, that's enough to ground you and help keep you more balanced. And so for the past couple of weeks, I've been doing that, and I find myself getting back into a much better place because I am doing that. I find myself again going through my Facebook and my Instagram feeds and culling anything that doesn't feed my soul, because if it's not feeding me, it's taking from me. And I need to eliminate those taking things as much as possible to help battle the other stress in my life with being back in school and everything. So it's having those basis of things that you need. But I think too, it's like I said, it's giving yourself that grace to be able to experiment with them and flexible with them, so that you can find a way for them to meet your needs as your needs change.
Yes, and not feeling like you have to switch it all back on if you've let it slip. Like you were saying, you get that momentum, don't you? And you're building up a good practice, and you're doing, everything's working really well, and you're doing all these things that are working really well, and you're feeling great. And then all of a sudden there's a wave of stress that comes in, and you let things slip. And then, you let them slip for a day, and then it's a week. And then all of a sudden it feels like this really overwhelming task to put them all back in place again.
Totally.
But like you say, you don't have to. There's no reason why. I don't know what, your meditation practice is and for how long it is. But like you were saying, just doing it at the weekends and then maybe sometimes in the week, even if it's just taking 3 minutes to slow your breathing, that's better than nothing. And also, I think when you've had a practice that's in place that you've been doing regularly, actually just doing little snippets, you do tap into that.
Absolutely. Yes.
That habit that you've built. So it's not like you're having to start from scratch. And just being a bit patient and kind with yourself and building the habits back up a bit more slowly, rather than thinking, well, everything was going great and I was doing all these things. There's no reason why I can't be doing them all again tomorrow. Well, yeah, there is. It's not so easy to just switch it all back on again.
Right. Well, and you hear people say the same thing about keto, and I don't find it necessarily true for myself, because I do have to give up the sugar completely, and things like that. But you hear people talk about that with keto, where they'll say, okay, so you've fallen off the truck. How do you get back on it? Well, you don't necessarily have to do everything all at once, but if you can start and break it down into steps, that you can do it. So maybe this week there's no wheat products. Maybe next week there's no sugar products. Maybe the following week you say, okay, no takeout of any sort, or however you want to structure that to get yourself back into that good place again. You can do that. And yeah, it can happen in steps, and it can happen in shifted ways that might be different than how you've done it before, but as long as it kind of gets you back to where you need to be, that's the important piece. Not that you're doing it again perfectly, but that you're doing it in a way that meets your needs at that point in time and helps you move forward.
That's right. And it really depends what works for you. But I think giving up something like sugar especially is a great example. I can remember when I stopped putting sugar in my coffee. I did not do it all at once. I can't remember how many spoons I used to have, but say 2. Well, to start with, I went from 2 to 1.5. Not a big difference. It was a little bit less sweet, and I just kept taking it down and down and down. So I hardly noticed, small steps. I mean, that's the trick. If you can make the small steps almost so small that you don't really notice you're doing it. Before I knew it, I was at literally like a few grains of sugar I would put in, and it really made the difference. And then it was, okay, I've got to take that leap to having no sugar. And believe it or not, it was a big leap from just a few grains to nothing. But because obviously I'd built up and it wasn't that much difference in sweet. And once I'd done it and once I'd actually made that leap and got used to it for a few days, there really was no going back. I mean, that's not to say I don't have issues with sugar and I don't have issues with sweetener. You know that I do. You know, I'm on a challenge having no sweetener at the moment. But I have never put sugar back in my coffee.
Good for
and
you.
if I was to put just a few grains of sugar in my coffee, it would be disgusting to me and I would throw it away.
Right.
So it's funny how, you know, different rules for different things, but there are ways of doing it, and it really depends on your personality and what works for you.
Yes.
If you've got patience, you know, there's no reason why you can't cut things down really, really slowly.
Right. And even for myself, I mean, as much as I know the best thing for me would be absolutely no sugars and absolutely no sugar substitutes, I do know that when I'm coming off of that place where I've been out of control and I'm trying to get back into the place of being good keto, one of the things that does save me and helps me manage that is allowing myself a little bit of sugar substitute. So I'm allowing myself sugar-free barbecue sauce or sugar-free ketchup, you know, or a little bit of Mio in my water, which I know has some artificial sweetener in it. But I'm not allowing myself, because I've never really gotten into them hugely, going out and making all of the things, like making all of the baked goods and the breads and the things like that, and having then a lot of those artificial sweeteners in my diet. You know, I'm keeping it controlled to some extent, but it's giving me that little bit of leeway that sometimes you just need, that little bit of leeway to make you feel like you're not having to give up everything all at once and feeling more defeated before you begin.
And I thought it was interesting what you were saying about Weight Watchers.
Mm-hmm.
Because personally, I don't have a good experience with Weight Watchers. I only went to one group and I found it highly judgmental. And if I ever feel judged, especially when it comes to food, what I go and do is eat a lot more. So I used to leave the Weight Watchers meeting and go to the fish and chip shop on the way home and buy even more than I would usually buy, because that's what happens if somebody makes me feel guilty when it comes to food. If I feel shame, that's my response. So it wasn't good for me at all. But I have heard other people having a lot of success, and it's good to hear that they're changing their plans to make it more accessible to people who want to take a low carb approach. It's good to hear that potentially they're cutting down on these refined foods. I mean, that's the same problem that plagues Atkins, are all these crappy products that come with it. And I can remember, I think it was quite new when I was there, all the Weight Watchers products were just sort of starting, but there were loads of Weight Watchers products and a lot of them are just full of crap. They're not good stuff.
Well, and that's the funny part about Weight Watchers is because in their plan itself, what they say you should eat is definitely much cleaner looking than it used to be. But they still sell a lot of products on their shelves. But that's how they make their money. So, okay, so it's kind of an odd dichotomy that doesn't quite mesh. But I think, too, with Weight Watchers, one of the hugest things, and I will say this over and over, is so much depends on who the leader of your meeting is and the connection you can make with that leader of your meeting. And I was very fortunate that both the first time I dropped a huge amount of weight when I was living in the city of Chicago. And then the second time I dropped a lot of weight, that time it was about 100 pounds. I was in the suburbs of Chicago and had found a different leader. And both times those women were just absolutely incredible human beings who were full of knowledge and information and grace, and who understood that life is life and nobody is perfect. And there wasn't that sense of judgment around anything, but very accepting and very understanding. And I think that was essential to helping me, which is why I think when I strayed away from that, I lost so much and I didn't realize it at the time, but I lost so much of what was through them. And then the people in the meetings that I had gotten to know, so much of a support network that I didn't even realize how important that was until I was far beyond that and out of that. And I think, like we were saying earlier about, the groups and things online and getting your tribe somehow, of having someone that you can talk to about this and someone you can bounce these ideas off of. And, have that connection with people. That's a huge piece of it. And even Weight Watchers will admit that one of the biggest positive influences of their program that really helps people stick with it is that sense of community and that sense of networking that's available and support that's available. As much as all the other stuff is important, if you take away that piece, you lose too much of it for it to truly be effective. And they see that even in the differences between the success numbers coming out of meetings versus the success numbers of people who just join their online program. And there's a vast difference in success rates for those things.
Yes, I was going to say that's, like you've just said, that is the biggest component. And especially if you combine that with a really good leader. It was Sarah who just mentioned the other week. She said exactly the same thing. And the person who led theirs was fantastic and actually sort of leaned towards low carb anyway. I think there is so much to be able to, that potentially you can get from a system like that, right. Especially if you have a good leader, especially if they're not too rigid necessarily about you following their plan to the letter and using their products. If it's more about the group support and more about the general information, and if you can go to something like that with a low carb leaning and they're accepting of that, you're going to get all the benefits from all the good stuff.
Right. I think my only criticism at this point, looking at Weight Watchers and the plans that they're promoting, is that although you can make it much more low carb friendly, they don't provide allowances for any additional fats.
Right.
And that's the part that I always struggled with the last couple times I tried joining them. And sticking with more of a low carb version is that you can't follow the points really, because unfortunately those points don't allow for an increased amount of fats or even a significantly increased amount of protein if that's what you need versus the fats, just because they're weighted too heavily in the system. So you blow through too many of your points too quickly on those things.
So really all you're paying for is the group.
Yeah.
Which is not to say, perhaps that's all you need to take from it. If you happen to find a really good supportive group and a good group leader, then, maybe you can do your own thing from a diet point of view and just get those benefits.
Right. Yeah. If that's where the only place that you can get your support, then by all means go there and get your support.
Absolutely.
Because I think it's important that we find those things as much as possible. And it can take a while. I mean, it certainly took me a while to get into a place where I felt I was with groups of people that I was comfortable with and felt an alliance and a connection with, that it really began to feel like more of a support versus just something you're going to and taking a look at because you're on social media of some sort.
Yes, and as much as online meeting places are great for most people, they need that face-to-face.
Yeah. And that is, I have to say, one of the really positive things that I think has come out of this past year, and so many people being in lockdown with the COVID-19 situation, is that it has forced us, or it's opened up avenues for us to go into more face-to-face type situations. And I feel that in some ways has been wonderful for people because they have been getting more of that face-to-face connection. Like even, you and I and the group that I've met through, Daisy's Lovelies and the KKB, getting to know those people better in more of a face-to-face context.
Powerful connection, isn't it?
Very powerful. Yes.
Yeah. So there's a lot to be said for that. If you can't do the face-to-face, but you can do the face-to-face online.
Right.
It's not quite the same, but it's pretty good. And for someone like myself who doesn't have the local community, it's everything.
Yes, I agree, because I'm like you. I don't have the local community here of people that I really know. I mean, there is a small community here in the area that I live, but it's not well connected. And we can't get together and do things. And I don't know any of those people socially outside of just that little bit of community that's online. So it's been a godsend actually to have those communities out there and that chance to be connected with people from other places. And I love the diversity of what we have in our groups too, just because there is such a wide range of people from so many different places in the country and so many different walks of life and career paths and knowledge bases. And it's just been amazing.
I love also what you say about looking at keto as your home base. And I guess I think of it as my default position. So the same kind of thing that it becomes part of your identity.
Right.
This is who I am. This is not just something I do, or this is not just something I'm doing until I've lost weight, or this is not just something I do with some kind of finite date. This is what I do. This is who I am. And yes, as you said, you might stray off plan a bit, but that's always what you come back to. It's always what you come home to. It's always the default position. And I think when you make that switch, that makes a big difference. When it stops just becoming this new thing that you're trying and it becomes, it's what everyone says. It can feel a little bit judgy, especially when you're new. Oh, stop calling keto a diet. You've got to accept it as a lifestyle. Keto's a lifestyle. It's not a diet. And yeah, that's true. But it is something that you have to come to yourself. You can't just accept it because you've been told to.
Right.
Especially if it feels a bit like you're being told off.
Right.
But once you make that switch yourself, once it comes from inside, when you make that decision, I think that's a big change for a lot of people.
I agree. And I do think that's different for everybody. I think for me, it was fairly easy to make that switch because the premise of keto so resonated with everything inside of me when I first learned about it. And then once I got into it and saw what it could do for me, that just reinforced it. But I think for a lot of people, they have to get into it and see what the effects are and what outcomes they get from it to see how much it means to them to make it then their home base, rather than just this thing that they're trying. So, and that can take a while.
Absolutely.
And I think too, it's also learning that it's okay for your keto to be okay the way you do it just for you and not necessarily anybody else, because everybody's keto is a little bit different. And you have to allow yourself to believe that and encourage other people to believe that. Because I think that's the other thing that sometimes people new to keto run into, is that stumbling block of, well, this is keto and this is not, and there's no give or take on it in any way, shape, or form. And that's nice if you're a robot and you can do that, but not everybody is. So if you can, again, allow yourself the grace to experiment and find out what works for you and what your keto looks like, allow yourself that opportunity and do the experimenting and do your N=1 to see what works for you and your body. And, if that means that when it's watermelon season, like for me, you allow yourself to have watermelon a couple of times, and that's what it is for you. And for other people, that might not be it. For other people, it might be something else. Some people talk about wanting that little bit of like carb in a sweet potato every now and then, or, having that one cheat meal every 2 weeks. And that might be how they keto, and that's an okay thing as long as it's working for you. If it's not, then you need to look at that. But just realizing that getting there to where it is your home base can look very different for you than it can for somebody next door to you, and that's okay.
I completely agree. That's what I love about it. It is so adaptable. Keto really isn't rigid. It can look that way from outside, but it really isn't. It's not about making yourself fit keto. It's about making a keto plan work for you. Even if that ends up actually not being keto, but more low carb, whatever. This is your starting point. And it's absolutely the best way to keto is to find a way to make it work for you.
Yeah.
You're the one who's important.
And that's a continual journey for all of us. I don't think that's anything that you ever just find one way and think that's going to work for the next 2 decades, because it probably won't, because your body changes and grows and, well, maybe not grows, but changes as you get older. And so, you might have to tweak it and shift it and change it. And sometimes a little bit, sometimes maybe even a lot of it, but just be open to that. And It's funny because so much of that goes back to what we learn in education about fixed mindset versus your flexible mindset, and don't have a fixed mindset about your body. Your body is not a fixed thing in space. Your body is in motion constantly and changing constantly. So have that open mindset to allow yourself to make those changes as they need to occur. And they might not necessarily be easy or ones that you want to make, but if you're aware of them and the effects and the impact that it can have, then that might make you a little more willing to do what might be uncomfortable or undesirable.
And just tell us a little bit about what it's like at the moment being a teacher. Big shout out to the teachers, because you've been on quite a journey this year.
It has been a very interesting journey. So I am in about my 35th year of teaching right now. And if you had told me that this was what teaching was going to look like at this point in my life, I would have laughed in your face. I never could have imagined that we would have gone through what we have gone through this past year. It's getting a little bit easier. So I've been in school since about the second week in August was when we went back. And in my district, we started with an alternating schedule. So only half the students who were coming back into the buildings were in them at one time. After the first couple of weeks of that, though, they decided numbers were low enough. We then went back full time into the buildings, and we've been that way for a few weeks now. And we will continue that for the next few weeks at least. It is weird. I'll just put it, it's weird. Sometimes I can't think of any other way to put it than it's just weird. It is a new level of exhaustion, I have to admit, just because as much as I'm willing to wear a mask and I don't mind wearing a mask and having to teach and project your voice through that mask as a teacher all day long is exhausting. I get done at the end of the day and just my entire neck and vocal cords ache just because it's been such a strain. There are so many new and different things to keep track of and procedures to keep track of that it again just makes your day that much more exhausting because you feel like you're spending all of your time trying to catch all these little pieces that are new to your job that never existed before, taking temperatures and making sure kids wear masks and making sure people are social distancing at all times if possible, and just all those little pieces, filling out the forms you have to when you walk into the building in the morning that, states that you don't have any of the symptoms. All of those different pieces just added onto our plates at this point in time. So for teaching, it is stressful. It is very stressful. And the hardest part, at least now I feel like it's a little easier because we've kind of gotten into a routine and I kind of am getting my feet underneath me in terms of the changes I've had to make. But that shift from March until now, with so many different things, with going full online and then having summer off, but trying to figure out what we were doing in the fall and the changes in the fall and having to get used to. So I have students in school, but I also have students that are at-home learners and having to push out information to them as well during the day. So in many ways, it's almost like double teaching during my day because I have to meet the needs of both groups. It's a whole new world. And being flexible enough to adjust to that. I've always considered myself a fairly flexible person, but I'll be the first to admit that this level of flexibility I never even thought about or considered having to encounter at this point in time. And so that has created for me then quite a bit of stress, which is why I have really struggled with staying in my home base of keto for the past 6 months. But like I said, it gets easier as you get more comfortable with the new routines. That helps tremendously. But where it will go from here, who knows? At what point will things perhaps need to shift again? Who knows? And it's the great unknown. And the great unknown sometimes is the biggest stressor of all, unfortunately.
Absolutely. Yes, that's the thing. If you knew what the plan was, if you knew how everything was going to unfold, you could prepare for it.
Right.
But, you don't, and you didn't. And yeah, you've coped with it. But there was that massive undertaking when everything went online. I can remember how much stress you were going through in such a short period of time. You had to provide online learning for everybody.
Right.
And now, like you say, you're back at school, but you're also having to do the online, and then there's all this extra admin stuff and different routines and the different things you have to do. I mean, it just seems to be that you just keep getting more and more additions to your job, and you're expected to have to do a lot more.
Education. Yes, welcome to the field of education, definitely.
And not knowing whether you've crested that wave yet or not.
Right, exactly.
Is it just going to get? Are they just going to keep adding more and more and more? So I can completely understand the stress of that, the stress of not knowing.
Yes.
Are we at the peak of things being difficult now in my job and they're going to start getting easier, or is it going to keep getting more difficult? Is it going to stay at this level for a period of time? Not knowing.
Right.
That is really, really hard.
And for me, I mean, like I said, we did go back with kids in the buildings, and at this point we do have them all back in the buildings. I have friends, though, who are teaching, and they are full virtual teachers. None of the kids went back into their buildings. Everybody is teaching online in their districts. And I have to say, quite honestly, and perhaps it's more a function of the age that I teach, because I do work with preschoolers with disabilities, but it was so much better knowing that I would get to know my kids face to face before having to potentially deal with going full virtual. I can't imagine trying to begin to meet their needs in the ways that I could now without having had this opportunity to work hands-on with them. So I am grateful for that. And I know that is a piece that some of my friends struggle with, whose districts are full virtual at this point, and they haven't gone back in. But I can't say that either one is easier than the other, quite honestly, because each one comes with its own set of struggles and challenges and things that you have to work out and figure out and manage, that it's hard all the way around, no matter what. My district, I'm lucky, is trying in small ways to give us compensations because they know the amount of time and energy that we're putting into it. But for all of the accolades that we received in March, nobody from up above in government has come forth with any kind of monetary thing to compensate in any other way what teachers are doing at this point in time. So it's not like the districts have the availability necessarily of additional funds and things to help compensate teachers for what they are doing. And so, yeah, we are in that position where more and more is put on your plate, but nothing else changes. You're just expected to do more and more and more.
And of course, like you were saying, it depends whether you're online or you're face-to-face, but you're also back in school. And so you've got that added stress of your risk increasing and your personal need to stay as healthy as possible, which again is another layer of pressure, especially if you're someone who battles with those addiction issues and battles with the comfort food element.
Yes.
Because, that's the time when you feel the need, you feel the call for those kind of foods is when you're stressed. But you've probably got that, that little critic in the back of your head saying, well, it's very important now for you to stay healthy. So this is the most important time for you to stay keto. So what the hell do you think you're doing?
That's contemplating. Yes, you're inside my head. That's what my brain had been saying for those first few weeks of school. Absolutely. It's like, what are you doing to yourself? This is not the best thing for your body. This is not the best way to fight it if you were to come in contact with the virus. And yet the stress level was just saying, feed me, feed me, feed me. So there was that complete internal battle, which at this point, like I said, I've gotten it to settle down some. I've gotten it back under control a little bit better, which I'm really grateful for. And some of it is just recognizing that I need to and letting that side of my brain win. And some of it is that being back in it now for a little bit, you don't feel quite as much stress because you are developing your routines and your structures and those things that help you feel more comfortable. So that helps ease the anxiety a little bit.
And taking away some of that unknown.
Yes.
I can remember how stressed you were just before you were going back, and so many unknowns. So a lot of those are known now. A lot of those are becoming routines. So that just starts becoming a little bit easier. Right.
Well, and I think too, I'm very fortunate that we have not yet had any identified cases within my actual school building. And I think that creates a sense of comfort or safety, so to speak. But at the same time, I try not to let that create too much comfort or safety, because then I think that's when people start to get more lax about things and relaxed in what they're doing. And I don't think that's something we can afford to do yet at this point. So I try to walk a very fine line there in terms of feeling comfortable and easing the anxiety, but still being aware and conscientious and taking the actions that are needed to keep myself safe. And especially with the little ones that I work with, I can try to keep them apart, but me from them, there is no ability to social distance and be effective in my position, because that just does not happen. So the more I can do to protect myself and keep myself safe by doing those things that I know that are good, like stress management and eating the good diet and, keeping the blood sugars down as much as I can and all of that stuff, I think is so essential. And I try to keep that like right in the front of my head as much as I can to help me stay focused.
And how are they doing? How are the kids dealing with it?
Kids are great. Kids for the
resilient little things.
They are amazingly resilient. So yeah, my little ones, it's hard because I can't let them play the way they would like to play. And I think we could see so much more out of them if we could, but they have adapted to how we structure things and how we're having to do things right now, like you wouldn't believe, which is great. And everybody's kind of settling into a nice little rhythm now that we're a few weeks into the school year. And that's good. That feels good.
It really does. Well, I know you've mentioned before how teachers were everyone's favourite, and that seems to be waning for some reason, and it certainly shouldn't. So
yeah,
thank you to you for what you do, and thanks to all the teachers out there. It's never an easy job, but it's it's very, very difficult at the moment.
Thank you. And trust me, we appreciate your acknowledgement of that tremendously.
Well, I hope things do start getting easier. That would be a good thing. And I hope that is the trajectory it follows from now on.
Me too.
Well, it's been wonderful chatting to you today.
Thank you.
And hearing all about you. Perhaps you could leave us with a top tip.
Okay. And I've been thinking about this for days now, trying to come up with what I wanted to be my top tip. And I think it goes back to what we talked about a home base and keeping that home base as much as you possibly can in something like keto. And with keto, if you can keep it as your home base, yes, you might stray, but go back to it. Keep going back to it, because although it might seem harder sometimes than others, you cannot discount the benefits of it long term and down the road. And it might seem harder to get back into it, but I find it gets easier and easier to stay within it. And I think that's the essential piece is, not giving up, always come back, always try to get back to your home base.
Yes, that's a very good point, actually. It does get easier. And I think that's something for people really to take away and take to heart if they struggle with sticking to this new diet.
Yes.
Just keep going back and keep thinking of it as your home base, because it really does get easier. From another person who goes off the rails frequently, haven't for a long time now actually, but it does get easier, because the other thing is that having done it and having seen all the benefits that you get from it, you've got that positive reinforcement. So knowing that you're going back to something that's good.
Right. And each time you go back, you tweak it a little bit more for yourself. So when you do go back to it, I feel like it's a little bit more of an easy, comfortable coat to put on, just because you have tweaked those little pieces of things that do work for you. So you're not always having to look at what will work for you too. So that kind of just makes it a little bit easier from that component.
That's right. Well, it's been wonderful.
Thank
you so much, Kate.
Thank you. This has been great. I've really enjoyed it.
To get the resources and links from this show, please go to ketowomanpodcast.com/episodes. Please share this podcast with as many people as possible by sharing one of my links or just taking a screenshot of an episode that you enjoyed. Reviews really help raise the profile of the podcast, which gets it in front of more people, but also helps me attract a wide variety of guests. So please take a minute to leave a review on whichever podcast app or platform you like to listen on. It doesn't go unnoticed by me, the people who regularly like, share and comment on my posts. Your support really does mean the world to me. Thank you. Are you enjoying this podcast? Help me make more episodes and videos by making a pledge at my Patreon page, patreon.com/KetoWoman, or simply hit the support button on the Keto Woman podcast website. Don't forget to join in the fun on the Keto Woman podcast Instagram and Facebook pages, and Daisy_Keto Woman on Twitter. Are you my next extraordinary woman? Maybe you've got an idea for a show, a topic you would like to hear about. Let me know how I can tickle your earbuds by dropping me a line at daisy@ketowomanpodcast.com. This week's end quote is from an unknown author, but it's something I absolutely agree with. Teaching is the one profession that creates all other professions. Bye-bye, Keto Lovelies.